Headline: Blind 4-year-old beggar girl found in hole by millionaire. But when he tries to pull her out, someone smacks him over the head, and 3 days later he wakes up to a shocking discovery. Rate my story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sun was beginning to set over the sprawling metropolis when 30-year-old widower Bennett Sterling decided to take a different route home. His striking features and commanding presence usually turned heads, but this particular afternoon, something compelled him to explore the less traveled streets of the city's fringes. He had amassed a considerable fortune investing in Wall Street stocks, and his net worth in dollars seemed to grow daily, but lately a void had settled in, one that all the money in the world couldn't fill. As he walked along the narrow, poorly lit streets, his Italian leather loafers were in stark contrast to the cracked asphalt and graffitied walls. The smell of cheap eats, mixed with the odor of piled-up garbage, created an atmosphere he had never encountered in his elegant social circles. It was as if he were discovering a whole new city, hidden behind the skyscrapers and shopping malls he frequented daily. It was then that a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears. Low, pained whimpers were coming from somewhere nearby, but he couldn't pinpoint the exact location. He stopped in the middle of the deserted sidewalk, straining his ears as the noise of the distant traffic competed with those cries that tugged at something deep within him. There was something about the fragility of those sounds that reminded him of an old pain, buried long ago. Following the direction of the whimpers, he came to a vacant lot surrounded by a rusted fence. The place looked abandoned for years, with scattered debris and weeds growing among pieces of broken concrete. In the farthest corner of the lot, he noticed an irregular hole in the ground, as if someone had been digging there looking for something valuable, but had given up halfway through. He approached carefully, his footsteps echoing in the growing silence of the approaching night. The whimpers became clearer with each step, and his heart began to race as he realized they were coming from inside that hole. He knelt at the edge and looked down, trying to see through the darkness that filled the cavity. What he saw left him completely shocked. A 4-year-old girl was huddled at the bottom of the hole, but her appearance was so frail and malnourished that she looked only 2. Her limbs were extremely thin, almost skeletal, and her clothes were torn and covered in dirt. But what impressed him most were her eyes, completely white, without pupils, revealing that the child was blind. The girl was trembling with cold and fear, her dry lips moving in incomprehensible murmurs as she tried to warm herself by hugging her knees. Her small, dirty hands groped the air around her as if searching for something familiar in that hostile and frightening environment. It was a sight that broke any human heart, and he felt a desperate urge to get her out of there immediately. "Hey, little one, it's okay," he said in the softest voice he could muster, not wanting to scare her any further. "I'm going to help you out of there." The girl stopped whimpering and turned her head in the direction of his voice, her blind eyes fixing on an approximate point where he was. An expression of hope mixed with terror came over her dirty face, as if she had heard similar promises before and been disappointed. Without hesitation, he began to carefully descend into the hole, calculating each movement to avoid causing a landslide that could hurt the child. The space was tight and damp, with a smell of mold and decay that made him feel nauseous. As he approached the girl, he could better see her deplorable state: small wounds on her arms and legs, tangled hair full of dirt, and a thinness that indicated she had not eaten properly for a long time. When he finally reached her, he slowly extended his hand, allowing her to touch his fingers before trying to pick her up. The girl's skin was cold and rough, but she did not resist the contact. In fact, she seemed to calm down slightly when she felt the warmth of his hands. "I'm going to take you to a safe place," he murmured, preparing to lift her into his arms. "You won't be alone anymore." It was exactly at that moment, as he bent down to pick up the child, that something heavy and hard struck the back of his head with brutal force. The pain exploded in his mind like lightning, and the last thing he managed to see before losing consciousness were the girl's blind eyes, widening in terror, her lips opening in a silent scream that echoed in his mind as everything went dark around him. 3 days passed in a deep and confused darkness. When he finally opened his eyes, Bennett found himself in a small, dimly lit room with peeling walls and the penetrating smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with the odor of expired medicines. A throbbing pain hammered his head, and when he tried to move, he realized that his muscles ached as if he'd been hit by a truck. A middle-aged woman approached the simple bed where he was lying. Her grey hair was tied in a messy bun, and her tired eyes reflected the compassion of someone who had seen a lot of suffering over the years. The white coat she wore was stained and patched, evidencing the precariousness of the place where he was. "You're finally awake," she said in a soft but concerned voice. "I'm the nurse in charge of you here at the hospital. They found you unconscious in a vacant lot 3 days ago. Do you remember anything of what happened?" He tried to organize his thoughts, but it was as if his mind was a puzzle with fundamental pieces missing. He vaguely remembered walking through unfamiliar streets, but after that, everything became an impenetrable fog. Even more disturbing was the feeling that something extremely important had happened, something he desperately needed to remember. I can't remember," he murmured, bringing his hand to his bandaged head. "Where exactly did they find me? Was there anyone else with me?" The compassionate nurse shook her head negatively, her eyes showing genuine sadness. "You were alone when the janitor of a nearby building found you. There were no documents with you, no wallet or identification. You were lucky to have survived with that kind of head wound." An inexplicable anguish took over his chest. There was something about being alone that didn't make sense, as if he should be looking for someone, as if someone needed his help. Fragments of blurred images danced in his mind. A small figure, a sense of urgency, the sound of faint crying, but nothing connected coherently. "Has anyone reported a disappearance? Any child lost in the area?" he asked with an intensity that surprised even the nurse. "Child?" she replied, frowning. "Why are you asking about a child? Do you have children?" This question left him even more confused. He couldn't remember having children, but he also couldn't completely rule out the possibility. There were huge gaps in his memory, especially in the last 5 years, as if someone had erased entire pages of his personal history. During the following days in the precarious hospital, he tried desperately to recover his memories. The nurse told him that when delirious with fever, he constantly repeated words like little one, alone, and promise. These words echoed in his mind like distant echoes of a song he knew but couldn't identify. When he was finally discharged, he discovered that his problems were just beginning. He tried to access his bank accounts, but they had all been blocked. He called his construction company, where he had invested so much money and built an empire based on his profits and dividends, only to find that it had declared bankruptcy during the days he was unconscious. His cruel stepmother answered the phone when he tried to contact his family. Her voice was filled with a contempt he didn't remember having caused, but that seemed rooted in years of resentment. "Oh, finally decided to show up," she said with cutting sarcasm. "After disappearing for days and leaving the company in ruins with your irresponsible decisions, now you want to come back as if nothing had happened. What decisions? I don't remember making any decisions that could harm the company," he protested, feeling a growing frustration with his own inability to recall such recent events. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," she retorted coldly. "Your mental instability became evident to everyone. Investors lost confidence, contracts were cancelled, and now we are all paying for your erratic behavior." The conversation continued devastatingly. His stepmother had managed to convince a judge that he was mentally incapacitated, using his unexplained disappearance and memory loss as evidence of psychological instability. During his absence, she had taken control of all his assets, claiming to be protecting the family's assets from his irrational decisions. "You've always been too generous, always giving money to any lost cause that appeared in front of you," she continued, her voice distilling years of accumulated resentment. "I warned you that your obsession with helping others would end up destroying everything we built. And now look at what happened. When he hung up the phone, he found himself officially without financial resources, without a fixed home, and without any prospect of recovering his old life. The man who had once accumulated substantial wealth through smart investments and prosperous businesses now found himself forced to live like any ordinary person, depending on the charity of others to survive. But what tormented him most was not the material loss. It was the growing certainty that he had failed someone who desperately needed his help. Every night he dreamed of a faint voice calling for help, and woke up with tears in his eyes, without understanding why his soul ached so much. He decided to return to the place where he had been found, moved by an intuition he couldn't explain. Perhaps there he would find clues about what had happened, about who or what he had lost that fateful night. The vacant lot seemed even more desolate in the daylight, and when he arrived at the hole where he vaguely remembered being, he found it completely empty. During the following weeks, the former millionaire wandered the streets of the outskirts like a man possessed by a mission he himself did not fully understand. He had exchanged his expensive suits for simple clothes donated by the compassionate nurse, and his Italian shoes for worn sneakers he had found in a thrift store. His movie star look still attracted attention, but now for different reasons. People wondered what such a handsome man was doing, wandering the poorest neighborhoods of the city. Every day he visited the same places, small squares where children played barefoot on the dirt floor, bus stops where entire families sheltered from the rain, busy corners where street vendors shouted offering their products. There was something in these places that resonated in his wounded soul, as if he were following an invisible map engraved in his fragmented memory. It was during one of these obsessive walks that he noticed a 4-year-old boy watching him from afar. The child had disheveled hair and patched clothes, but his big, intelligent eyes showed a precocious maturity, typical of someone who had faced hardship from a very early age. The boy had been following him for days, always keeping a safe distance, like a wild animal studying a potential predator. Finally, the former millionaire decided to approach the boy directly. He approached slowly, with his hands visible and a gentle smile on his face, trying not to scare the child who had clearly learned to distrust unfamiliar adults. "Hi, little one," he said in the softest voice possible. "Do you know me? I've seen you around here several times." The 4-year-old boy took a few steps back, his dark eyes carefully assessing every movement of the man in front of him. There was a tension in his small shoulders that suggested he was ready to run at any moment, but also a curiosity that kept him there, watching. "You're the man who was looking for her," the boy said finally, his voice thin but surprisingly firm. "I saw you that night." The former millionaire's heart leapt. "Her? Who is she? Can you tell me what you saw?" But the boy had already taken a few steps back, his expression closing again. "I can't talk to strangers. My sister always said I can't trust big men." "Your sister?" he asked, feeling a pang of recognition he couldn't explain. "Where is she now?" The boy's face contorted in an expression of pain that seemed too big for someone so young. "They took her on the same night you appeared. When you fell down and went quiet, they went down into the hole and took her." The words hit the former millionaire like physical punches. Fragments of memory began to stir in his mind. A little girl, very fragile, eyes that couldn't see, hands that trembled with fear. The image was nebulous, but the emotion associated with it was devastatingly clear: despair, urgency, the desperate need to protect someone helpless. "What did your sister look like?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Can you describe her to me?" The boy hesitated for a long moment, studying the man's face. Something in the genuine expression of concern must have touched his distrust, because he finally began to speak. "She can't see anything. Her eyes are white like milk. She's very small. She looks younger than me, but she's my older sister. She always took care of me when our mom didn't come home." The words came out in torrents, as if the boy had kept this information for too long without having anyone to share it with. "She has a special thing," continued the boy, his eyes lighting up slightly. "She can recognize people just by their voice, even people she's only met once. She remembers the way they talk. It's like she keeps all the sounds inside her head." The former millionaire felt something stir deep in his memory. A special ability, a child who memorized voices. That meant something important, he was sure, but the information remained frustratingly out of his reach. "Who were the people who took her? Were you able to see them well?" The boy shook his head. "It was very dark, but I heard them talking. The man said something about her being perfect for the job. The woman complained that she was too dirty, but the man said they would take care of that later." A cold anger began to grow in the former millionaire's chest. Whoever had taken the girl clearly had plans to use her special ability, and from the boy's descriptions, they were not benevolent plans. During the following days, he returned several times to talk to the boy, always bringing small gifts: a sweetbread, a fruit, a simple toy that he could buy with the few coins he earned doing small jobs in the area. Gradually, the boy's distrust began to unravel, replaced by a cautious trust. "Why do you want to find my sister so much?" asked the boy during one of their conversations. "You don't even know her well." The former millionaire thought carefully before answering. How to explain to a child something he himself did not fully understand? "I feel like I need to help her. Even if I don't remember exactly what happened, I know she was in danger, and I failed to protect her." "She has that effect on people," said the boy with a seriousness that did not match his age. "My sister makes others want to take care of her. But that also attracts bad people who want to use her." It was then that the former millionaire understood the magnitude of his search. He wasn't just looking for a lost child. He was looking for someone who had touched his soul in a profound way, someone whose vulnerability had awakened in him a protective instinct that transcended his own understanding. "Would you help me find her?" he asked the boy. "I know it's dangerous, but together we might have a better chance." The boy looked at him for a long moment, his small eyes carefully weighing the proposal. Finally, he nodded. "She always said that if anything happened to her, I should look for good people to help me. I think you might be one of those people." In the weeks that followed the alliance with the boy, the former millionaire faced humiliations he had never imagined possible. His cruel stepmother had spread rumors throughout the city about his mental instability, using his memory loss and erratic behavior as evidence that he had completely lost his mind. The few acquaintances he met on the streets looked at him with a mixture of pity and discomfort, as if he were an embarrassing spectacle. "Look who showed up," said a former business partner when she found him in a cheap bakery where he was trying to buy bread with the coins he had managed to get. The great investment tycoon now begging for food. What a spectacular fall. The elegant woman looked him up and down, her eyes scanning his simple clothes and his unshaven face for days. "Your stepmother was right when she said you had completely lost control, disappearing for days, letting the company sink, and now this strange obsession with street children. Really, you need psychiatric help." Each word was like a dagger in his wounded pride, but what bothered him most was the reference to street children. How had his search for one particular girl turned into a strange obsession in people's mouths? How many other stories had his stepmother concocted to justify seizing control of his fortune? The boy, who had witnessed the scene from afar, approached after the woman left. His small eyes gleamed with a rage that seemed disproportionate for his age. "She's wicked," he said simply. "I can see it in her face. My sister always said wicked people have a bad light around them, even if she couldn't see it." During his walks through the city, Bennett began to have fragmented flashbacks that came like unexpected waves. They were pieces of memories that didn't connect completely, but that brought intense feelings of familiarity. On one of these occasions, while passing through a bustling shopping street, a specific melody played by a street musician made him stop abruptly. The music was simple, an old folk song, but when he heard it, his mind was flooded with blurred images. An afternoon with heavy fog, the feeling of being lost, a small, gentle voice offering help. He vaguely remembered walking through these same streets months ago, disoriented by a thick fog that had descended on the city when someone had guided him using only verbal instructions. "The girl," he murmured to himself, the pieces beginning to slowly fall into place. "She helped me find my way." The boy who was beside him looked at him curiously. "Are you remembering something?" "Your sister. She knows me. We've met before, long before that night in the hole. She helped me when I was lost." The words came out with difficulty, as if he were putting together a puzzle in the dark. "That makes sense," the boy responded thoughtfully. "My sister always helped lost people. She said she could hear when someone was confused or scared, even from far away. It was like she felt the sadness in people's voices." During the following days, Bennett dedicated himself to talking with homeless people who knew the girl. He discovered an informal network of marginalized people who looked after each other, sharing information about dangers, job opportunities, and safe places to sleep. The blind girl had been a beloved figure in this community, respected for her ability to identify dangerous people just by the tone of their voice. "She saved my life once," said an elderly woman who sold flowers on the sidewalk. "There was a man who was pretending to be nice, offering money to the younger girls. She heard him talking to me and said right away that he was dangerous, that his voice had hidden evil. 2 days later, we found out that he had tried to kidnap a child in another neighborhood." "Where do you think she might be now?" asked Bennett, his urgency growing with each story he heard. "There's a couple who've been snatching street kids," said a man who collected cardboard for recycling. "They pretend to be good Samaritans, say they'll give them a home and food, but the kids are never seen again." "What kind of couple?" he insisted, feeling a mixture of hope and terror. "He runs a little store downtown, sells trinkets and used stuff. The woman is all smiles in front of others, but there's something in her eyes that doesn't fool anyone. They started showing up around here a couple of months ago, always looking for special kids, as they say." The boy tugged at Bennett's sleeve. "Special kids," he repeated with concern. "Like my sister, they knew about her ability. For an entire week, they discreetly investigated the suspicious couple." The store was on a busy street in the downtown shopping district, a small and cramped place full of trinkets, used clothes, and objects of no apparent value. The greedy shopkeeper was a middle-aged man with a greasy smile that didn't reach his eyes, always wearing flashy clothes that tried to hide his predatory nature. His manipulative wife was even more dangerous, with an impressive ability to appear maternal and caring in front of strangers, but with moments when her mask slipped, revealing a calculating and cold look. They watched the couple interacting with customers for days, noting how they managed to extract personal information from people with an almost supernatural ability. "She's there," the boy said with absolute certainty during one of their observation sessions. "I can feel it. It's like my sister is calling for me, but very quietly." It was then that Bennett noticed something that made his blood run cold. During a particularly busy afternoon at the store, he saw the manipulative wife approach a well-dressed customer and start an apparently casual conversation. But there was something about the way she directed the conversation, asking specific questions about income and lifestyle, that seemed too rehearsed to be natural. A few minutes later, the greedy shopkeeper appeared with a specific product that was exactly what the wealthy customer was looking for, offering a price that seemed too good to be true. The customer left satisfied, but Bennett had noticed the pattern. Someone was providing information about the customers even before they expressed their needs. "They're using her," he said to the boy, his voice charged with a controlled fury. "They're forcing your sister to identify which customers have more money so they can run targeted scams." With the confirmation that the girl was being kept in the suspicious couple's store, Bennett and the boy needed to develop a careful plan. They couldn't simply break into the place or call the authorities without concrete evidence, especially considering that he himself was being seen as mentally unstable by society. Any accusations he made would be easily discredited by his cruel stepmother and her allies. For days, they observed the movement patterns of the greedy shopkeeper and his manipulative wife. They discovered that the store closed every day at 6 in the evening, but lights remained on in the back of the establishment until very late. It was there that they suspected the girl was being kept, forced to use her special ability to identify prosperous customers. "I need to get in there and see her with my own eyes," Bennett said to the boy during one of their conversations in the small park where they met daily. "But if something goes wrong, do you promise you'll run and get help?" The boy nodded with determination. "I'll go with you. My sister will recognize my voice, and that will make her calmer. She gets very scared when she doesn't know people." On the night chosen for the rescue attempt, they positioned themselves at the back of the retail store. The place was even more run down than it appeared from the front. Poorly maintained walls, dirty windows, and an unpleasant smell that came from inside the establishment. Through a crack in the curtain of one of the windows, Bennett managed to see the interior of what appeared to be a makeshift storage room. What he saw made his stomach churn. In a dark corner of the room, there was a small and fragile figure sitting on the dirty floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes and old merchandise. It was definitely the blind girl he had tried to rescue weeks ago, but her condition was even worse than when he had found her in the hole. Her hair was cut unevenly and poorly, probably to try to disguise her original appearance. Her clothes were dirty rags that barely covered her skeletal body, and even from afar it was possible to see that she had lost even more weight. But the most disturbing thing was her posture. She was hunched over, rocking slightly back and forth in a repetitive movement that suggested deep psychological trauma. "It's her," whispered the boy, tears running down his young face. "But she's different. She's sadder, more scared." At that moment they heard heavy footsteps approaching the back of the store. The greedy shopkeeper appeared carrying a tray with what appeared to be food, but the amount was ridiculously small. A few pieces of stale bread and a plastic cup with dirty water. "Dinner time, little one," he said in a voice that tried to sound gentle but carried an underlying cruelty. "But first, you need to tell me about that customer from this afternoon. The man in the grey suit who bought the old tools. Did he have a lot of money?" The girl raised her head slowly, her blind eyes turning in the approximate direction of the voice. When she spoke, her voice was weaker and more broken than Bennett remembered. He was nervous," she said hesitantly. His voice trembled a little. But it wasn't fear of spending money. It was another kind of nervousness. "What kind?" insisted the shopkeeper, his patience clearly limited. Like when someone is hiding something bad they did," replied the girl, shrinking even more. "People like that usually have money, but they're also afraid of being discovered." The greedy shopkeeper smiled predatorily. "Perfect. That means we can pressure him a little more next time he shows up. You did well, little one." He placed the tray on the floor next to the girl and walked away, leaving her alone again. Bennett watched in horror as she groped carefully in search of the miserable food, her hands trembling with hunger and weakness. "I can't wait any longer," he murmured to the boy. "She's dying slowly in there. I need to get her out of there today." They waited until all the lights in the commercial part of the store went out, indicating that the couple had retired to their rooms on the upper floor of the building. With extreme care, Bennett managed to force one of the back windows, which was poorly sealed due to the owner's neglect of the location. The interior of the store smelled of mold, cheap chemicals, and something more unpleasant that he preferred not to identify. He moved silently between the piles of merchandise until he reached the corner where the girl was. She had fallen asleep in an uncomfortable position, still clutching the piece of bread she hadn't managed to finish eating. "Little one," he whispered softly, not wanting to scare her. "It's me. I've come to take you away from here." The girl woke up instantly, her entire body tensing in a panic response that broke Bennett's heart. But then something extraordinary happened. She tilted her head slightly, as if she were carefully processing the sound of his voice. I know you," she said with genuine surprise in her weak voice. "You're the man in the fog. The lost man I helped find his way." "Yes," he replied, thrilled that she had remembered. "And now I'm here to help you find your way away from this terrible place." At that moment, the boy appeared silently beside them. "Sister," he said quietly. The girl's reaction was immediate and intense. Tears began to stream down her dirty face as she extended her trembling hands in the direction of the familiar voice. "You're alive," she sobbed. "I thought they said you had, that I was never going to see you again." "I'm here," said the boy, taking her hands between his small ones, "and we're never going to separate again." Bennett helped them get up, noting how the girl could barely stand due to weakness. She was clearly malnourished and probably sick, needing urgent medical care. It was when they were about to leave through the window that they heard heavy footsteps descending the stairs that led to the couple's quarters. A light came on in the commercial part of the store, and the angry voice of the manipulative wife echoed through the room. "I told you I heard noises down there," she complained. "Go check if that little pest is trying to run away again." Bennett's heart leapt. They had been discovered, and now they were trapped between the open window and the captors who were approaching. They needed to act quickly, but carrying the weak girl through the window would take too long. "Run," whispered the girl with surprising determination. "Leave me here and run. They'll hurt you if they find out." "Never," Bennett replied firmly, picking her up despite her silent protests. This time, no one gets left behind. With the fragile girl in his arms, Bennett moved as quietly as possible towards the open window. Each second seemed like an eternity as the shopkeeper's footsteps approached the storage room. The boy had already climbed out the window and was waiting outside, his arms extended to help receive his sister. "This way, quick," whispered the boy, his small hands trying to assist in passing the girl through the narrow opening of the window. But at the exact moment that Bennett managed to pass the girl to the outside, a bright light came on behind him. The furious voice of the greedy shopkeeper cut through the silence of the night like a blade. "What the hell is going on here? Thief! Kidnapper!" Bennett turned to face the man who had kept the girl in captivity. Under the harsh light of the fluorescent lamp, the shopkeeper looked even more despicable. His small eyes gleamed with a sickening greed, and his posture revealed someone accustomed to intimidating weaker people. "This child doesn't belong to you," Bennett said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "She was kidnapped and is being exploited." "Kidnapped!" cackled the shopkeeper, his manipulative wife appearing behind him with an expression of false outrage. "We saved this child from the streets. We gave her a home, food, protection, and now you come here in the middle of the night, like a common criminal, to steal our adopted daughter." The lie was uttered with such conviction that for a moment Bennett questioned whether other people would believe this version of the facts. The couple had clearly rehearsed this story in case they were confronted. "Adopted daughter?" he retorted, feeling the indignation grow. "You keep her locked up like an animal, malnourished, forced to work, using her special abilities to deceive your customers." "Prove it," challenged the manipulative wife, crossing her arms. "Prove that we don't take good care of her. Prove that she's not better off with us than she was begging on the dirty streets of this city." It was at that moment that something clicked in Bennett's mind. The arrogant tone of the couple, the way they talked about the girl as if she were property, the excessive confidence in their lies. All of this suggested that they had faced questioning before and had always managed to get away with it. "How many other children have passed through here?" he asked, his voice laden with a controlled fury. "How many others have you saved from the streets to use in your schemes?" The momentary expression of panic on the manipulative wife's face confirmed his suspicions. They weren't occasional criminals, they were experienced predators who had perfected their method over time. Outside, the boy held his sister against his chest, trying to console her as she trembled violently. The girl was in shock, murmuring incomprehensible words and clinging to her brother as if he were the only real thing in a world of nightmares. "We need to get out of here," the boy said urgently when Bennett finally managed to climb out the window. "They'll call people to get us." But as they ran away from the place, carrying the girl who could barely remain conscious, Bennett heard the greedy shopkeeper shouting out the window, "You can run! But everyone in this city will know that you are criminals. I'll make sure of it." They spent the night in a makeshift shelter under an abandoned bridge, where other homeless people had created a small encampment. The elderly woman who sold flowers and knew the girl received them with tears in her eyes, immediately offering to help with basic medical care. "My dear girl," she whispered as she gently cleaned the child's dirty face with a damp cloth. "What have they done to you? You're so thin, so weak." The girl reacted positively to the presence of the known woman, her breathing becoming less agitated when she heard the familiar voice. But when any stranger approached, she shrank immediately against the boy's chest, demonstrating a deep trauma that went far beyond physical needs. "She's going to need time to recover," the elderly woman said to Bennett. "What they did to her wasn't just about food or shelter. They broke something inside her, something that will take a long time to heal." During the following days, Bennett faced exactly what the greedy shopkeeper had promised. The couple spread their version of events throughout the city, describing him as a mentally unstable man who had kidnapped a child legally adopted by them. The story gained momentum when his cruel stepmother publicly confirmed his erratic tendencies and dangerous obsession with street children. "I warned you that he was losing control," she declared to anyone who wanted to listen. "First, he destroyed his own company with irrational decisions. Then he disappeared for days without explanation. And now this. It's a tragedy to see someone from the family deteriorate mentally in this way." The weight of these accusations was overwhelming. Bennett found himself completely isolated from the society that had once respected him. Old business connections avoided him on the streets, acquaintances looked away when they saw him, and even some homeless people began to question his motives. But what tormented him most was the girl's condition. She had stopped talking almost completely, communicating only through small gestures with her brother. Her special abilities to identify people through voices seemed to have turned against her. Now she panicked whenever she heard unfamiliar voices, even if they were from people trying to help. "She's afraid to use her ability," explained the boy during a particularly difficult conversation. "They made them use it so much, in so many bad ways, that now she thinks her special ability is a bad thing." It was during one of these difficult nights that something unexpected happened. Bennett was sitting next to the girl, humming softly a melody that had come to his mind without explanation, when she suddenly straightened up and looked in his direction with an expression of deep recognition. "That song," she said, with the first clear voice she had produced since the rescue. "You used to sing that song to me before." "Before?" he asked, confused. "When before?" "At the hospital," she replied slowly, as if she were recovering a buried memory. You were in a bed next to mine. You were hurt on the head, and you sang that song when you thought no one was listening. Bennett's heart stopped. He had no memory of being in a hospital with the girl, but the certainty in her voice was undeniable. More fragments of memories began to emerge, blurred images of a small room, the smell of disinfectant, the sensation of constant pain in his head. Do you remember anything else about that hospital? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the growing excitement. You cried at night, said the girl simply, and you said a name, always the same name. What name? Sonia, she replied. You apologized to Sonia. The name Sonia echoed in Bennett's mind, like a distant echo of a life he couldn't completely recall. During the following hours, fragments of memories began to emerge more clearly, like pieces of a puzzle, finally finding their correct places. He vaguely remembered a woman with a soft voice and gentle hands, someone who had meant a lot to him, but whose face remained frustratingly obscure in his fragmented memory. Who was Sonia to you? Asked the girl, her special sensitivity detecting the intense emotion in his voice whenever the name was mentioned. I can't quite remember, he admitted, running his hands over his face in frustration, but I feel like she was very important. When you said that name, it was like something moved inside my chest, an old pain that I didn't even know I was carrying. The elderly woman who cared for the flowers approached them with a thoughtful expression. She had overheard part of the conversation and seemed to be trying to organize her own memories of past events. Sonia, she murmured slowly. That name sounds familiar. There was a social worker who worked with abandoned children in the area a few years ago. A very dedicated woman, always trying to find families for the little ones who lived on the streets. Bennett's heart raced. A social worker. What was she like? Do you remember more details about her? She was a special person, continued the elderly woman, her eyes lighting up with the memory. Never gave up on a child, even when everyone else had lost hope. She could see potential where others saw only problems, but something terrible happened to her. What happened? Asked the boy, holding his sister's hand, which had become tense, listening to the conversation. There was an accident. A terrible car accident on a rainy night. She was coming back from one of her visits to the families when, well, she didn't recover from her injuries. The words hit Bennett like a lightning bolt. Fragmented images began to form in his mind. A hospital, a white bed, a woman with tubes and bandages, himself sitting next to her, holding a small, cold hand. The pain he felt at that moment was so intense that he had to lean against the wall to avoid falling. Did you know her well? Asked the elderly woman, noticing his extreme reaction. I think I loved her, he said, the words coming out with difficulty. And I think I made a promise to her before it was too late. During the following days, with the help of the community of homeless people who had become his surrogate family, Bennett began to investigate more about Sonia's life. He discovered that she had worked tirelessly for a small, non-governmental organization that cared for children in vulnerable situations, dedicating her entire life to finding solutions for the most desperate cases. In the public archives of the organization, which he managed to access through a sympathetic employee, he found records that confirmed his growing suspicions. Sonia had dedicated her last months of life to a particularly complex case. 2 orphaned children, siblings, one of whom had visual impairment and special sensory abilities that made her both vulnerable and valuable to people with bad intentions. She was trying to find us a family, said the girl when he shared these discoveries. Before the accident, a kind lady used to visit us where we lived with our sick grandmother. She always said she was going to find good people who would take care of us properly. Our grandmother died soon after the lady stopped coming, added the boy, and that's when we started living alone on the street. I always wondered why she never came back. Bennett felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders like a ton of concrete. Sonia had trusted him. Even if he didn't completely remember the details, it was evident that she had asked him to take care of the children if something happened to her, and he had failed miserably. But there was something else in the memories that were beginning to return. He remembered being in a hospital, not as a patient, but as a frequent visitor. Sonia had been hospitalized for weeks after the accident, and he had spent almost every night beside her bed, hoping she would wake up so they could talk about plans for the children. "I promised her I would find you," he said to the siblings, his voice charged with emotion. "On the last night before it was too late, I promised that I would look for you and make sure you were safe." "Then why did it take so long?" asked the boy, not with anger but with genuine curiosity. "Because I got lost," admitted Bennett. "After she left, I buried myself in work, in business, trying to forget the pain. I built a financial empire, accumulated a fortune through investments and stocks, but I set aside the only thing that really mattered, the promise I made to the person I loved most in my life." It was during this emotional conversation that they were interrupted by a commotion in the encampment. Several people were running towards the entrance of the bridge, whispering urgent words about authorities and a search. The greedy shopkeeper had fulfilled his threat and managed to convince someone in a position of authority that a child had been kidnapped. "They're coming here," said the elderly woman, running to them with her eyes wide with fear. "The couple from the store brought official people. They're saying you kidnapped a child legally adopted by them." Bennett looked at the siblings who had finally been reunited, at the people who had become his chosen family, and made a decision that would change everything. He would not run anymore. It was time to face the lies and fight for the truth, even if it meant risking his own freedom. "I want you to hide," he said to the children. "I'm going to face this alone. If they take me, you look for the woman of the flowers. She'll take care of you until I can resolve this situation." "No," said the girl with surprising determination, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Enough of separating us. Enough of people leaving when they promised to stay. We're going to face this together." When the figures of authority finally arrived at the encampment, they found an unexpected scene. Instead of a desperate man trying to flee with a kidnapped child, they found an improvised but united family, surrounded by a community of people who clearly supported and protected them. The greedy shopkeeper was present, pointing dramatically at Bennett. "It's him, the kidnapper, and there's our adopted daughter, whom he stole from our house in the middle of the night." But before any official word could be spoken, the girl stepped forward. Her blind eyes turned in the approximate direction of the shopkeeper's voice, and when she spoke, her voice carried a clarity and strength that surprised everyone present. "That man lied," she said, her special ability allowing her to detect every nuance of falsehood in the shopkeeper's voice. "He was never my father. He kept me locked up, forced me to work, barely gave me food. And in his voice now, I can hear that he knows he's lying. I can hear the fear of being discovered." The silence that followed the girl's words was tense and charged with expectation. The official responsible for the operation, a middle-aged man with a serious but fair expression, looked alternately at the greedy shopkeeper and at the child who had just made a devastating accusation. The girl's special ability to detect lies through voices had clearly impressed everyone present. "This is a very serious accusation," said the official calmly. "Girl, are you sure of what you're saying?" The girl nodded with determination, her blind eyes fixed on the approximate direction from which the official voice came. "I'm sure. In his voice I can hear nervousness, lies, and especially fear. People who tell the truth don't have that kind of fear in their voice." The greedy shopkeeper tried to laugh, but the sound came out forced and unconvincing. "Are you going to believe a mentally disturbed child? She suffered trauma living on the streets. She no longer knows how to distinguish reality from fantasy." "Interesting," said the manipulative wife, joining the defense in a calculated manner. "That's exactly what happens to children who go through traumatic experiences. They create fantasies to deal with reality. Our poor adopted daughter has clearly been influenced by this unstable man. But the community of homeless people had gathered around the group, and several voices began to manifest simultaneously. The elderly woman of the flowers was the first to speak with authority. "I've known these children for years," she declared firmly. "They were never adopted by this couple. They lived alone since their grandmother passed away, and I helped them when I could. This man and this woman appeared in the area only a few months ago, always looking for special children to take away." Other residents began to corroborate the story, each adding details that painted a very different picture than the couple had presented. The man who collected cardboard told about seeing the shopkeeper watching children suspiciously. A woman who sold food on the street reported strange conversations she had witnessed between the couple about using special talents to make money. Bennett realized that it was time to present his own version of the facts. "I can prove that they were using this girl's special ability to deceive customers in their store," he said, keeping his voice calm despite the anxiety he felt. "They forced her to identify people with money so they could run targeted scams." "Prove it," challenged the manipulative wife, but there was something in her voice that the girl captured immediately. "She's lying now too," said the girl, pointing in the woman's direction. Her voice changed. It got higher, tenser, and she has that quick breath that people take when they're very afraid of being discovered. The official made a decision that surprised everyone. "Let's go to their store," he declared. "If these allegations are true, there must be evidence of what was happening there." The walk to the commercial store was tense, with the couple constantly trying to change the subject or question Bennett's sanity. But when they arrived at the establishment, the evidence began to appear quickly. In the back of the store, where the girl had been kept, there were still clear signs that someone had lived there in precarious conditions. A dirty mattress on the floor, dishes with leftovers, and mainly a series of notes in a notebook that detailed information about wealthy customers and their shopping habits. "This is too specific to be a coincidence," observed the official, flipping through the pages full of detailed observations about the behavior and purchasing power of different people. "How did you get this accurate information about your customers?" The greedy shopkeeper tried one last desperate lie. "They're just normal business observations. Any experienced merchant knows how to identify customers with more financial resources." "Lie," said the girl immediately. His voice is shaking now, just like when he forced me to tell him about people. He's very scared. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. One of the customers mentioned in the notebook appeared at the store, apparently to make a routine purchase. It was a well-dressed man who greeted the shopkeeper with familiarity, but when he saw all the commotion, he became curious about what was happening. "Sir," said the official to the customer, "could you tell us how you are normally served in this store? Is there something special about the way they serve you?" The man seemed confused, but answered honestly, "Well, it's interesting that you ask that. They always know exactly what I'm looking for before I even say it, and they always have expensive products that seem to have been selected specifically for me. I thought it was just good customer service." The girl heard the customer's voice and immediately reacted with recognition. "I know that voice," she said. "They made me listen to him many times. They always asked if he had money to buy expensive things, if he seemed nervous or confident when he spoke." The customer became visibly disturbed by this revelation. "You mean you were spying on me? Using a child to analyze me?" The situation was becoming untenable for the couple. The manipulative wife tried one last strategy, fake tears streaming down her face as she took on a tone of misunderstood victim. "We just wanted to help this child," she sobbed theatrically. "She was abandoned, alone, without prospects. We offered her a home, care, a chance to use her special talents productively." But the girl was no longer willing to allow her words to be distorted. "They never gave me a home," she said with a strength in her voice that surprised even Bennett. "They gave me dirty water and pieces of old bread once a day. They made me sleep on the dirty floor between boxes of trash, and whenever I cried or asked for my brother, they locked me in the dark for hours. The official had heard enough. From what I can see here, there is substantial evidence of child exploitation and detailed documentation of schemes to deceive customers. I'm going to need you to come with us for further clarification. As the couple was being taken to give testimony, the greedy shopkeeper cast one last hateful look in Bennett's direction. "You think you've won something," he said with venom in his voice. "Even if they prove we're wrong, you're still a man without resources, without credibility, without a future, and these children will end up in some institution where no one will care about them." These words hit Bennett like a stab. The shopkeeper was right about one thing. Even if they managed to prove the children's innocence and the couple's guilt, he still didn't have the resources necessary to offer them an adequate life. His fortune had disappeared, his reputation was ruined, and his own sanity was being questioned publicly. But it was in this moment of despair that the girl did something that changed everything. She walked to where he was and took his hand with her small, trembling hands. "You don't need to be rich to be our family," she said simply. "You just need to stay with us and not leave like everyone else did." The boy joined them, forming a small but united circle. "We can work together," he said. "I know how to find things that people throw away. My sister can help people with their problems using her special ability in the right way, and you're smart. Together we are a family." At that moment, Bennett understood that he had spent years building an empire of money and property, but had lost sight of the true treasure that Sonia had tried to show him, the incalculable value of a family united by true love, regardless of financial circumstances. With the criminal couple in custody, Bennett and the children faced a complex new reality. Although they had managed to prove their innocence and expose the exploitation scheme, the practical challenges of forming a family without adequate resources became evident quickly. The official responsible for the case, although sympathetic to the situation, was clear about the legal limitations they faced. "I understand the bond you have developed," he said during a conversation the following day, "but for these children to officially be under your care, it will be necessary to prove financial stability, adequate housing, and the ability to provide education and medical care." The reality of these requirements weighed on Bennett like a mountain. Without his previous fortune, without access to his savings and investments that had been blocked by his cruel stepmother, he had no way of proving any of these conditions. His bank account was empty, he owned no properties in his name, and his reputation in the financial community had been completely destroyed. During the following weeks, he dedicated himself obsessively to finding a way to rebuild his financial life from scratch. He accepted any job he could find, carrying boxes in markets, cleaning office windows, making deliveries by bike through the streets of the great metropolis. The money he earned barely covered the basic needs of food and temporary shelter for the three of them. The children, however, displayed an adaptability and determination that constantly surprised him. The boy used his scavenging skills to help support their makeshift family, always bringing back useful items he recovered or small amounts of money he earned helping local store owners. The girl, in turn, slowly began to use her special ability positively. When she discovered she could help lost or confused people by identifying their emotions through their voices, she began offering this assistance voluntarily. Her ability to detect sadness, fear, or disorientation in voices made her a natural counselor for other street dwellers facing emotional difficulties. "She has a true gift," commented the elderly flower vendor, observing how the girl comforted a young woman who had run away from home and was lost in the big city. "It's not just the ability to hear voices. It's her capacity to genuinely care about the suffering of others." But it was during one of these informal help sessions that something extraordinary happened. The girl was talking to a businessman who seemed to be going through a deep personal crisis when she suddenly stopped speaking and became intensely focused. "I know your voice," she said slowly. "Not from now, but from before. From a long time ago." The man, a well-dressed, middle-aged entrepreneur with tired eyes, looked at her curiously. "That's impossible, little one. We've never met before." "Yes, we have," the girl insisted. "You were at the hospital, the same hospital where I was a long time ago. You visited someone every day, and you always cried when you thought no one was listening." Bennett, who was nearby, felt his heart race. Another fragment of memory was about to emerge. He could feel it. "You visited the woman in the bed next to mine," continued the girl, "the lady who took care of children. You held her hand and read stories to her, even when she couldn't respond." The businessman was visibly shaken. You were there when Sonia—" "Sonia," repeated Bennett, the connection finally forming in his mind. "You knew Sonia." What followed was a conversation that completely changed the course of their lives. The businessman, whose name was Edgar, revealed himself to be Sonia's older brother. He had spent the years since his sister's passing wondering about the children she worried about in her final days. "She constantly spoke about two special children who needed a family," said Edgar, tears streaming down his face. "A courageous boy and a girl with extraordinary abilities. She made us all promise that if anything happened to her, we would look for these children." "Why didn't you ever look for us?" asked the boy, his voice laden with old pain. "Because we didn't know your real names, where you lived, or how to find you," replied Edgar. "Sonia kept this information in personal files that disappeared after she was gone. We thought maybe you had been placed with some family through other social workers." Edgar then revealed something that left Bennett completely stunned. His sister had left specific instructions in her will about a substantial amount of money that should be used exclusively to care for the two orphaned children she had been trying to help. The amount, which had been in a special bank account all these years, had grown significantly through compound interest and conservative investments. "It's almost $500,000, said Edgar, showing bank documents confirming the existence of the account. "Enough money to ensure education, housing, medical care, and a stable future for both children." But there was a specific condition in Sonia's will that made the situation even more complex. The money could only be released if the children were under the care of someone Sonia had specifically mentioned in her last conversations. A man she loved and trusted completely to care for the children if anything happened to her. "She never told me his name," admitted Edgar, "but she mentioned some specific characteristics. She said he was a successful businessman who had built a fortune through smart investments, but had lost sight of what really mattered in life until he met her." Bennett felt as if the world was spinning around him. The descriptions matched perfectly with who he had been before losing his memory. "She also said," continued Edgar, "that this man had promised her he would find the children and take care of them as if they were his own, and that even if he lost everything he owned, he would still be the right person to be these children's father." The girl approached Bennett and gently touched his hand. "You're that man," she said with absolute certainty. "I can hear in your voice that you recognize everything he's saying, and I can hear also that you still love Sonia, even without completely remembering her." Edgar looked carefully at Bennett, studying his face and mannerisms. "There's something familiar about you," he admitted, "but how can I be sure you're really the person my sister mentioned?" It was at that moment that Bennett had another powerful flashback. He remembered sitting beside Sonia's bed in the hospital, holding her hand while she mumbled instructions about the children. He remembered promising her that he would use all his fortune, if necessary, to ensure the children had a better life. And then, the clearest memory of all, Sonia had given him a small golden pendant, a family heirloom that she wanted him to keep as a symbol of his promise. He had worn that pendant constantly after her passing, until the fateful night he had lost his memory. "The pendant," he murmured, instinctively reaching for his chest. "She gave me a golden pendant in the shape of a small heart. It had the initials SM engraved on the back." Edgar's eyes widened. "Sonia Maria. That was our grandmother's pendant. She said she would only give it to someone she considered true family." "I still have it," said Bennett, suddenly remembering. "It's in the apartment that was mine before everything changed. My cruel stepmother must have kept it with my other personal belongings." The journey to the apartment that had been his home before his memory loss was fraught with almost unbearable tension. Edgar had offered to accompany them, recognizing the importance of that moment for the children's future and for the resolution of Sonia's inheritance. The elegant building where Bennett had lived for years contrasted sharply with the simple places where he had spent the last few weeks. The building's entrance, once familiar and welcoming, now seemed hostile and intimidating. The doorman who had greeted him respectfully for years now looked at him with suspicion and discomfort, clearly influenced by the rumors spread by his cruel stepmother about his mental instability and erratic behavior. "I don't know if it's a good idea for you to go up there like that," said the doorman hesitantly, glancing nervously at the children accompanying him. "Your stepmother left specific instructions that you should not have access to the apartment without legal supervision." Edgar intervened with his authoritative presence as a successful businessman. "I'm a family lawyer," he lied diplomatically, "and I'm here to supervise the recovery of important personal documents for an ongoing legal process." Reluctantly, the doorman allowed them to go up, but not without making a discreet call that would surely alert the stepmother to Bennett's unwanted presence in the building. The luxurious apartment that had been his home seemed like a museum of a life he could barely recognize as his own. Expensive furniture covered in protective fabrics, dusty paintings on the walls, and a heavy silence that contrasted with the fragmented memories of animated conversations and social gatherings that were beginning to emerge in his mind. "Is this where you lived?" asked the boy, impressed with the size and elegance of the place. "It's bigger than any place we've ever been." "It was," replied Bennett melancholically, "but it never felt like a real home. Now I realize it was just a beautiful, empty place where I kept expensive things." The girl walked carefully through the apartment, her hands feeling for furniture and objects, as her special sensitivity captured the residual emotions that permeated the environment. "There's a lot of sadness here," she said softly, "old sadness, as if someone had cried a lot in these rooms." Edgar watched the girl's interaction with the environment and was impressed with her perception. "Sonia always said that special children can feel things that adults don't notice," he commented. "It seems she was right." Finding his personal belongings was more difficult than expected. The cruel stepmother had reorganized the entire apartment, moving valuables to safe locations and hiding less valuable personal items in less accessible cabinets and drawers. It was as if she had systematically tried to erase any trace of his personality and personal history from the place. It was in the master bedroom, inside a dusty box at the back of the closet, that they finally found his most intimate personal items. Old photographs, important documents, and small sentimental items he had collected over the years. Among them, carefully wrapped in a silk scarf, was the golden pendant that Sonia had given him. The moment his hands touched the pendant was electrifying. Clear and detailed memories began to flood his mind like a dam that had finally broken. He remembered the exact day Sonia had given him the pendant, the words she had whispered about the special children who needed protection, the solemn promise he had made to find them and care for them as if they were his own daughters. "This is the pendant," he said to Edgar, his hands trembling slightly as he held the small but significant object. "I can remember every word your sister said when she gave it to me." Edgar carefully examined the pendant, checking the engraved initials and comparing it to old photographs he carried in his wallet. The confirmation was undeniable. That was definitely the family pendant that Sonia had mentioned in her last conversations. "You really are the man she chose," said Edgar, his voice filled with emotion. "That means we can finally fulfill my sister's last wish." But it was at that moment of triumph that they heard heavy footsteps in the apartment hallway. The cruel stepmother had arrived, accompanied by two people who were clearly lawyers or legal officers. Her expression was a mixture of fury and despair, as if she knew her ability to control the situation was rapidly slipping from her grasp. "What are you doing here?" she screamed, bursting into the room with an aggression that frightened the children. "This apartment and everything in it are properties under my legal guardianship. You are trespassing and stealing." Bennett stood up slowly, the pendant still in his hands, and for the first time in months he felt a clarity and determination he had lost since losing his memory. "I'm not stealing anything," he said calmly. "I'm recovering something that has always been mine by right." "Right?" she laughed sarcastically. "You lost all your rights when you proved to be mentally incapable of managing your own affairs. When you disappeared for days without explanation, when you destroyed an entire company with your irrational decisions." "About that," Edgar interjected, presenting documents he had carefully prepared, "I believe there are some legal misunderstandings that need to be clarified. As a representative of the interests of the children mentioned in Sonia Maria's will, I have here evidence that there was fraudulent manipulation of this man's business during his period of temporary disability." The stepmother visibly paled. "What will? What children? This has nothing to do with this situation." "It has everything to do with it," Edgar replied firmly. "Especially when we discover that the mysterious bankruptcy of the company coincided exactly with suspicious financial transfers to accounts controlled by you." During the tense moments that followed, the girl approached the cruel stepmother and stood before her, her blind eyes fixed in the approximate direction from where the woman's voice was coming. The silence stretched as she carefully listened to every vocal nuance of the stepmother. "She's lying about almost everything," the girl said finally, her voice clear and confident. "I can hear in her voice that she knows exactly how the money disappeared and that she's very afraid of being discovered. But mostly, I can hear that she always hated him, even before any problems happened." The direct accusation and the girl's accuracy in detecting the lies left everyone present in silence. The stepmother's lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly realizing that their client had omitted important information about the situation. "That's ridiculous," protested the stepmother, but her voice had acquired exactly the sharp, nervous tone that the girl had learned to associate with people who were lying desperately. "Are you going to believe a disturbed child instead of official legal documents?" "We're going to believe the evidence," said one of Edgar's lawyers, who had arrived discreetly during the discussion. "And the evidence shows unauthorized bank transfers, falsified documents, and a series of irregularities that occurred precisely during the period when my client was incapacitated." Bennett watched his stepmother being confronted with proof of her manipulations and felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was sadness for the betrayal of someone who should have protected him, but mostly there was relief at finally understanding that his loss of fortune had not been the result of his own failures, but of a deliberate conspiracy to steal everything he had built. "Why?" he asked simply, his voice loaded more with pain than with anger. "Why did you do this to me? I always tried to be a good person, always tried to help those in need." The cruel stepmother's response revealed years of accumulated resentment. "Exactly for that reason," she shouted, "always giving money to any lost cause, always helping strangers while your own family was left aside. I knew that one day you were going to throw away everything we built because of this obsession with saving the world. But the children he helped never asked for anything in return," said the boy, with a surprising wisdom for his age. "They just needed someone who cared. Why is that bad?" The innocent question exposed the fundamental cruelty of the stepmother so clearly that even her own lawyers seemed uncomfortable with the situation they were defending. The days following the confrontation in the apartment were an emotional roller coaster of devastating revelations and painful discoveries. Edgar had mobilized a team of financial investigators to track exactly how the cruel stepmother had managed to manipulate the business during Bennett's period of incapacity. What they discovered was a scheme of corruption much more elaborate and systematic than anyone had imagined. The stepmother had not acted alone. She had allied herself with a group of dishonest executives from the construction company itself, taking advantage of the owner's period of mental confusion to implement a plan that had been developed for months. Fraudulent contracts had been signed in his name. Financial resources had been diverted through shell companies, and all the capital accumulated through years of smart investments in stocks and savings had been systematically drained. The total amount diverted exceeds $2 million, explained the investigator hired by Edgar during a tense meeting at the law office. They used falsified documents claiming that they were decisions of the owner himself, taking advantage of his absence and compromised mental state. Bennett listened to these revelations with a mixture of shock and growing indignation. Each detail of the scheme showed the level of premeditation and cruelty involved in the destruction of everything he had built. His stepmother had literally stolen not only his assets, but also his dignity and reputation, spreading stories about mental instability to justify her own criminal actions. But there is good news, continued the investigator. Most of the money can still be tracked and recovered. The criminals were too greedy and left too clear financial traces. With the evidence we have gathered, we can not only recover the stolen resources, but also seek compensation for moral and financial damages. The children, who had followed the entire investigation with growing interest, reacted differently to the news. The boy was clearly relieved to know that the man who had become his father figure was not really the financial failure everyone believed. The girl, in turn, seemed more concerned with Bennett's emotional state than with the financial issues. "You're sad even knowing you're going to get your money back," she observed during a private conversation. "I can hear in your voice that there's a sadness that won't go away just because you're going to be rich again." She was right. Recovering his fortune meant justice and stability for the children's future, but it also meant confronting the reality that people he had trusted had deliberately conspired to destroy him. The betrayal hurt more deeply than any financial loss. During the legal recovery process, something unexpected happened that completely changed everyone's perspective on the situation. While investigating the fraudulent transactions, they discovered that the cruel stepmother had attempted to sell the luxurious apartment to a specific buyer, the same greedy shopkeeper who had held the blind 4-year-old beggar girl captive. "This can't be a coincidence," said Edgar when this connection came to light. "There's a pattern here that suggests a network of criminals working together." Further investigation revealed that the greedy shopkeeper and his manipulative wife were part of a larger exploitation scheme that included not only street children, but also vulnerable people with disabilities or special abilities. They had identified Bennett as a potential target not only because of his wealth, but also because of his known generosity toward causes related to needy children. "They knew about your connection to Sonia," explained the investigator. "They knew you were looking for the children she had mentioned. The plan was to use this against you. First, steal the children to force you to appear, then incapacitate you during the rescue so that their accomplices could take over your assets." The calculated coldness of the plan shocked everyone. Bennett had been the victim of an elaborate trap from the moment he began searching for the children. The blow that had left him unconscious had not been casual. It had been part of a criminal strategy to destroy his life and steal his fortune. "That means," he said slowly, processing the implications, that if I hadn't lost my memory, I might never have discovered the truth about the manipulations. My temporary incapacity ended up being the key to exposing the entire criminal network. During the weeks of legal proceedings that followed, the children demonstrated a resilience and maturity that constantly impressed the adults around them. They actively participated in the process, with the girl using her special ability to identify lies in testimonies and the boy providing important details about the suspicious behavior they had observed over the months. They always talked about other jobs, the boy recalled during a deposition. It wasn't just about my sister. They mentioned other children, other special clients who paid well for certain types of services. The girl supplemented with even more disturbing information. I can remember the voices of people who visited the store when I was hidden in the back. Some of those voices were of bad people, people who wanted to use children for bad things. Whenever they arrived, the store owners got very excited, as if they were going to make a lot of money. These revelations led to the discovery of a much broader child exploitation network, with the greedy shopkeeper and his manipulative wife serving as intermediaries between vulnerable children and people willing to pay for their special services. The investigation expanded to include several other cases of missing children and destroyed families. But it was during one of the court hearings that the most dramatic moment of the entire process happened. The cruel stepmother, confronted with irrefutable evidence of her crimes, finally decided to confess everything in an explosion of anger and accumulated resentment. "Yes, I did everything," she shouted in front of the judge and everyone present, "and I would do it again. He wasted an entire fortune helping people who didn't deserve it, people who never gave him anything in return. I was just protecting the family's assets from his stupid decisions. But the children he helped gave a lot in return," said the girl, speaking for the first time during an official hearing. "They gave love, gratitude, and the chance for him to become a better person. That's worth more than any money." The simplicity and truth of the girl's words deeply touched everyone in the room. Even the judge seemed moved by the wisdom contained in the response of a 4-year-old child who had gone through so much suffering. Bennett looked at the two children who had changed his life in unimaginable ways and finally understood the true nature of the promise he had made to Sonia. It wasn't just about offering protection and material care. It was about forming a genuine family based on mutual love and shared growth. Sonia knew. He murmured to Edgar after the hearing. She knew that taking care of these children wouldn't just be a favor I was doing for her. It would be a gift they were giving to me. But there was still one last surprise waiting for them all. A revelation that no one had anticipated, and that would completely change the future of the family that was forming. The last surprise came in a way that no one could have foreseen. During the final organization of the legal documents to formalize the guardianship of the children and the recovery of the stolen assets, Edgar made a discovery in Sonia's personal files that he had kept all these years. Among her most intimate notes, he found a detailed diary that she had kept during her last months of life, recording not only her professional cases, but also her deepest personal feelings. "There's something in this diary that you need to know," said Edgar during a meeting at the temporary home where Bennett and the children were living while the legal matters were being resolved. His expression was a mixture of emotion and hesitation, as if he were about to share a secret that would fundamentally change everything they believed they knew about their situation. "What is it?" asked Bennett, noticing the tension in Edgar's voice. "Sonia didn't just know you," he said, looking first at Bennett and then at the children. "She had planned something much more significant than any of us imagined." Edgar opened the diary to a marked page and began to read aloud. "The man I love doesn't know it yet, but the children he will care for are more special than even I fully understood. The girl not only has the ability to detect emotions through voices, She has the potential to help people heal deep emotional traumas in a way that no traditional therapist can. The girl, who was listening attentively, tilted her head curiously. What does that mean? Edgar continued reading. During my sessions with her, I discovered that when she talks to people who have suffered trauma, her special sensitivity allows her to identify not only what is happening in the present, but also echoes of old pains that people carry. It's as if she can hear the wounds that people hide even from themselves. That's true, said the boy suddenly. My sister always knew when people were sad because of old things, not just because of things that were happening now. She could hear when someone had lost their mother or when they were afraid of things that happened a long time ago. Bennett felt a sudden connection. That's why I felt so connected to her from the first moment. She was able to detect my pain from the loss of Sonia, even when I didn't consciously remember that pain. Exactly, confirmed Edgar, turning a few pages of the diary, and there's more. Sonia wrote about having a vision for your future that went far beyond simply forming a family. She believed that together, the three of you could create something revolutionary. The following notes in the diary revealed an ambitious plan that Sonia had developed during her last weeks. She had envisioned the creation of a specialized center where children with special abilities could be trained to use their gifts to help other people who had suffered traumas. It would not be a traditional institution, but rather an extended family, where each special child would be cared for and guided by adults who truly understood their potential. She wanted you to be the pioneers, explained Edgar. Bennett, with his experience in business and construction, could create the physical and financial structure. The girl could be both a beneficiary and an example of how these special abilities can be developed positively. And the boy, well, she wrote something very interesting about him too. About me? Asked the boy, surprised. Edgar found the relevant page. Sonia observed that the boy possesses a natural ability to make distrustful people feel safe. He can build bridges of trust between people who have been hurt and the adults who want to help them. It's a rare and extremely valuable gift. During the following hours, as they explored more details of Sonia's plans, Bennett began to understand that his journey of loss and recovery had been much more than a series of random events. Each painful experience, each moment of despair, each small victory had been part of a process of transformation that prepared him for something bigger. She knew I would need to go through all this, he said, the realization coming like a wave of deep understanding. The loss of memory, the experience of living without resources, the understanding of what it's like to be vulnerable and dependent on the kindness of others. All this taught me things I would never have learned if I had simply continued being a wealthy and distant businessman. And we needed to go through the suffering too, added the girl with a wisdom that continued to surprise the adults. If we hadn't known the pain, we wouldn't know how to help other people who are going through the same thing. In the days that followed, as the final legal aspects were resolved and his fortune was officially restored, Bennett began to work on the plans left by Sonia. With his recovered financial resources and his experience in construction, he had the practical ability to transform her vision into reality. But it was during this planning period that an unexpected obstacle arose. The greedy shopkeeper, even in prison awaiting trial, managed to pass a message through his lawyer that alarmed everyone. He claimed to have information about other children with special abilities who were being held captive by other members of the criminal network that had not yet been discovered. He wants to make a deal, explained the lawyer during a tense meeting. Information about the location of these children in exchange for a reduction in his sentence. The proposal created a complex ethical dilemma. No one wanted to reward the criminal who had caused so much suffering, but the possibility of saving other children could not be ignored. "What do you think?" asked Bennett to the two children, recognizing that they had a right to participate in the decision that could affect other people in situations similar to those they had faced. The girl was silent for a long moment, clearly using her special sensitivity to process the emotional implications of the situation. "If there are other children suffering like we suffered," she said finally, "then we have to help them, even if it means that the bad person won't be punished as much as he should." The boy nodded in agreement. "My sister is right. The children who are trapped now are more important than our anger against him." The decision was made, and the agreement was accepted. The information provided by the greedy shopkeeper led to the rescue of 7 additional children who were being held in conditions similar to those the girl had faced. Each of these children had some kind of special ability that was being exploited. One could identify valuables by touch. Another could memorize entire conversations after hearing them only once. And others had similar gifts that made them valuable to unscrupulous criminals. "It's like we're creating our extended family before we even have our house ready," commented Bennett as he helped care for the newly rescued children. But it was at that moment of apparent triumph that news arrived that completely shook their expectations about the future. Edgar received a call from a distant hospital informing him that someone had specifically inquired about orphaned children with special abilities, mentioning the exact names of the boy and girl they had just officially adopted. "Who could it be?" asked Bennett, a growing concern settling in his chest. "All the criminals in the network have already been arrested." "I don't know," admitted Edgar, "but whoever it is, this person has very specific information about you, and from what I was told, she's coming here." The tension of the following days was almost unbearable. Bennett had hired additional security to protect the children, but the uncertainty about who might be looking for them created an atmosphere of constant anxiety. All the rescued children were still adjusting to the safe environment, and any new threat could trigger traumas they had just begun to heal. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon that the mysterious person finally appeared. She didn't arrive as a threat, but as a frail-looking elderly woman, accompanied by a young man who appeared to be her grandson. She carried a folder of old documents and yellowed photographs, and there were tears in her eyes when she asked to speak to Bennett and the children. "My name is Eleanor," she said with a trembling but determined voice. "I am Sonia's mother." The silence that followed was absolute. Edgar was visibly shocked. He had never mentioned that his grandmother was still alive, and the expression on his face suggested that this appearance was as unexpected for him as it was for the others. "Grandma," murmured Edgar, rising from the chair where he was sitting. "But we thought you had. After Sonia's passing, you disappeared. We looked for you for months." "I needed to leave," explained Eleanor, her hands trembling slightly as she held the folder. "The pain of losing my daughter was too great. I went to live with my sister in a small town in the countryside, trying to forget. But in the last few months, I started having strange dreams." "What kind of dreams?" asked Bennett, a strange intuition telling him that this woman brought important information. "Dreams with Sonia," she replied, opening the folder carefully. "She always appeared saying the same things, that the special children had been found, that the promise was being fulfilled, but that there was something important that I needed to deliver personally." Eleanor took out of the folder a series of old photographs and documents that seemed to be decades old. Among them were birth certificates, medical records, and several photos of small children that were clearly taken many years ago. "Sonia wasn't just a social worker," she revealed slowly. "Before choosing that profession, she had gone through a personal experience that completely changed her perspective on special children." The girl, who had been listening quietly, approached Eleanor. Her special sensitivity seemed to be capturing something important in the elderly woman's voice. "You have secrets in your voice," she said gently, "but they aren't bad secrets. They're secrets that hurt, but that are important." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "You really are special, my dear. Sonia told me about your extraordinary ability." What Eleanor revealed next completely changed everyone's understanding of the story behind their intertwined lives. Sonia had been born with a twin sister who also possessed special sensory abilities similar to the girls. But during childhood, this sister had been taken by people who wanted to exploit her gifts, and she had never been found again. That's why Sonia dedicated her life to protecting children like you, explained Eleanor, showing an old photo of two identical girls playing together. She knew that there were cruel people who specifically sought out children with special abilities, and she wanted to ensure that never again would a family go through what our family went through. Bennett felt a deep connection to this pain. That's why she cared so much about specific cases. It wasn't just work for her, it was personal. Exactly, confirmed Eleanor. And there's more. During all these years, we never stopped looking for my other daughter. We hired private investigators, followed leads, hoping that one day she might return. Sonia had promised that, if anything happened to her, I should continue protecting special children in her memory. It was then that Eleanor revealed the real reason for her visit. In recent months, she had received information that her missing daughter might still be alive, but in terrible conditions. The criminal network that had just been dismantled was part of a much larger system that had operated for decades, moving special children from city to city, exploiting their abilities and discarding them when they were no longer useful. My lost daughter would be a middle-aged woman now, said Eleanor, her voice broken by emotion. But the information I received suggests that she may be in a psychiatric institution, incorrectly classified as having mental problems, when in reality she has always just been a person with special abilities that no one understood. The possibility of finding Sonia's lost twin sister added a new dimension to the mission they had undertaken. It was no longer just about caring for the children they had rescued, but also about continuing the search that had consumed Sonia's life. "We're going to help you look for her," said Bennett without hesitation. "It's what Sonia would have wanted." But during the discussions about how to proceed with this search, something unexpected happened. One of the newly rescued children, a 6-year-old girl who had demonstrated abilities to identify lost objects by touch, began to act strangely when Eleanor showed the old photographs.